All right, welcome back. So it's time for more Mbsr. This has turned into a slog for sure. Very difficult to get through. We're also kind of reading stuff from people who are perhaps a bit problematic in society, doing things like using making science seem like a magical mystical thing that can be applied to any context, so kind of obfuscating public understanding of science. That's a big problem. And then another thing is just doing bad research that doesn't pass peer review, and that just doesn't muster up. Like, science is a is a whole process. So but so far I think it has been useful. So let's start this video by getting the readings done. So you can see I just have readings here, but I actually already got some done. So let's look at the last video to be more certain of what needs to be done. All right, welcome. All right, so we're gonna read the Paul Ekman. This is the one that's a bit controversial. All right, so let's start there, and then we've already got one of the four done. So let's try to get all of these done. So this is pretty old, 14 years old, from a magazine, it looks like, and it's Survival of the Kindest by Paul Ekman. Psychologist Paul Ekman, however, reveals Charles Darwin's real view of compassion, and it's not what you might think. His belief that altruism is a vital part of human and even animal life is being confirmed by modern science. In 1871, 11 years before his death, Charles Darwin published what has been called his greatest unread book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. I haven't read that, and I could be reading that. Hey, it got good reviews on Amazon. Alright, so his little-known discussion of sympathy in this book reveals a facet of Darwin's thinking that is contrary to the competitive, ruthless, and selfish view of human nature that has been mistakenly attributed to the Darwinian perspective. In the fourth chapter, entitled Comparison of the Mental Powers of Man and the Lower Animals, Darwin explained the origin of what he called sympathy, which today would be termed empathy, altruism, or compassion, describing how humans and other animals come to the aid of others in distress. While he acknowledged that such actions were most likely to occur within the family group, he wrote that the highest moral achievement is concern for the welfare of all living beings, both human and non-human. It should be no surprise, given Charles Darwin's commitment to the continuity of species, that he claimed that concern for the welfare of others is not a uniquely human characteristic. Darwin tells the following story. Several years ago, a keeper at the zoological gardens showed me some deep and scarcely healed wounds on the nape of his own neck, inflicted on him whilst kneeling on the floor by a fierce baboon. The little American monkey, who was a warm friend of this keeper, lived in the same compartment and was dreadfully afraid of the great baboon. Nevertheless, as soon as he saw his friend in peril, he rushed to the rescue, and by screams and bites so distracted the baboon that the man was able to escape. This incident is consistent with FBM DeWalt's 2004 study on the possibility of animal empathy. And I want to say one thing quick. One of the best, so Ron, Red Bank, Flattery, or Flannery, Red Bank Humanists. One of the coolest people I've ever met. And he's I've only met him in VR. But he's a so he's part of the Red Bank Humanists, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes humanist values. So, I haven't really been exposed to that much. So he was kind of my first exposure to actual humanism, which is basically like a religion, where I mean that like kind of in a literal sense, like they meet in a kind of a church place. They have rituals, so it's kind of it's like a religion to reason and science. It's a religion for ethics, for human rights, for responsibility, for social justice. It really checks all the boxes for me. So like it was my first exposure to like somebody who actually is like really heavily involved in humanism, and kind of peeling back the proxies for like what it is, like learning from the source. So if you want to learn more about evolution, I think if you go to redbankhumanists.com, you might see some of his older lectures. Now he just like a good scientist would do, he updates his beliefs in light of new evidence. So if you watch an older lecture, there might have some things in there that are out of date, but it should be a good place to start. And if you watch his newest lectures, it will be updated to the best of his ability. Oh, here we go. So here's some talks. Oh, these aren't. Yeah. So here's perfect. So yeah, if you go to the Red Bank Humanist site, which I can't believe I'm not subscribed to. What's wrong with me? I'll subscribe to it on my other channel. Yeah, so go to so this is Carl Sagan, or really one of the goats of greatest of all time of public science communication. And then so kind of like if you're watching this and you're under the age of 30, you probably know who Hank Green is. This is the original Hank Green, basically. All right, so what you can do is go to the videos and you can search for Ron Flannery. There we go. And now we get some of his older talks. So we get some of his talks 8 years ago. Now some of this will have stuff that he's since learned more and then updated the lectures, but I think they're pretty good. This one here is the good one here. This is the best one I've seen. So I definitely recommend this one. Yeah, these are like really, really good. So that's and then of course you can read directly from the source. You can read the publication by Charles Darwin himself. But anyway, I went into that tangent about Red Bank humanists and Ron Flannery because one thing I learned that was pretty fascinating was that one of the things that sets humans apart from apes is our aggression. So we become aggressive, we fight each other, we punch each other in the face, obviously, right? Like, there's no dispute about that. Baboons and monkeys do too. But there's a big difference between the two. Humans, when we become violent, you know, they're out to get me. Oh, this guy said something, he insulted my mother. Oh, that guy's a problem, he's got to go. Let's go rough him up after out in the parking lot. Did you hear what he said? You know, we plot and we enact justice. And we have a reason, like you know, there's a reason. Now when we're attacked, you know, that's the reason right there, like you know, self-defense. But what doesn't happen in humanity basically at all, unless there's some sort of like problem with the brain, is we don't just all of a sudden, you know, sip tea and then punch someone in the face for no reason, or like go berserk, or just have a violent outburst the same way we would fart or like burp. That happens in monkeys. It's unprovoked aggression, where it's just like they'll just like become violent just because, like, without any sort of, like, you know, planning, any sort of plotting, any sort of reason. Like, they just the brain becomes a monkey brain and they commit violence. And humans can't do that. It's not a feature they have, thankfully, and that's one of the things that kind of elevate humans, is what I learned. And so I just thought that was interesting. So and of course I'm sure I'm really badly misrepresenting what it was actually said, but that's why I recommend to go and see for yourself. I think it's probably brought up in the self-domestication of humans, because domestication has a lot to do with aggression. You know, domestication basically is a like an elimination of aggressive traits. Like, you know, your dog doesn't just bite. You know, if a dog bites someone, it's a big deal, right? That dog could even be like, you know, if it's a too aggressive dog, it could even be like put down, right? So, like, you know, domestication is basically all about eliminating aggressive traits. So yeah, that's my favorite one. Definitely check that out. So the likelihood of such actions, Darwin said, is greatest when the helper is related to the person needing help. It is evident in the first place, he wrote in The Descent of Man, that with mankind, the instinctive impulses have different degrees of strength. A savage will risk his own life to save that of a member of the same community, but will be wholly indifferent about a stranger. A young and timid mother, urged by the maternal instinct, will, without a moment's hesitation, run the greatest danger for her own infant. Darwin recognized, however, that exceptional people will help total strangers in distress, not just kin or loved ones. Nevertheless, many a civilized man who never before risked his life for another, but full of courage and sympathy, has disregarded the instinct of self-preservation and plunged at once into a torrent to save a drowning man, though a stranger. In this case, well, yeah, and that's not a good thing. let me do an aside here. If you are in this situation, you're going to make the situation worse by doing that. If you disregard your instinct for self-preservation and plunge at once into a torrent to save a drowning man, what's going to happen is you're both going to drown, because the drowning man is probably panicking and can't think straight. So the drowning man isn't going to take actions that make sense, like trying to float on his back and making sure that he can breathe and his mouth and nose is above water at all times. And then what's your strategy once you're out there? The best thing you can do is take a big branch, hold it out, take off your shirt, like toss it to them. But even better than that, find something that floats and put that out to them. Lifeguards. Let's just take a look at a lifeguard. So you'll see just about any picture of a lifeguard, they have this float on them, because if you jump out, disregard your own life, and go after someone, they're just going to try to use you as a flotation device. You'll drown, then they'll drown. Like, that's not how it works. It doesn't work that way. So every picture of a lifeguard, you see, here's this float here by his chair. There, they've got a float. They always have a float with them, because that's the only thing that's going to save a drowning person is tossing out to them something that floats. If you go out and swim out yourself, then they're going to attempt to use you as a float, which will dunk you underwater and cause you to drown. Or it'll just be, like trying to give somebody a handshake and they go in for a fist bump, and then you get confused and you're like, oh, they want a high five, and now you slap them in the face while they're trying to shake your hand. So it's like, it's just going to go horribly wrong if you have two conscious entities trying to exchange information during a life or death situation. You have to have one conscious entity, the person drowning and likely panicking, interact with a floaty object. That's the only way you can save their life, and that is why if you search for lifeguard and you look at pictures of lifeguard, there isn't a single picture out there on the internet where they're not holding some kind of a float. Even pictures that aren't of lifeguards, you see he's holding a surfboard, holding a boat. Here they have the float, there while they're doing the CPR in the background. You're never going to see a picture of a real lifeguard where they don't have a float. Now this is probably the first picture I've seen, but these don't look like they might have a float back here. This white thing up there looks like it could be a float. There might be a float in the backpack. This looks like it might be a strap here, so she might have the float strapped there. So yeah, just this is just an aside here, because we are reading Paul Ekman too, who's a little bit of a controversial figure. If you see someone drowning, do not disregard the instinct for self-preservation and plunge at once into the torrent, no matter if it's your own child or anything like that. Stay smart and act like a lifeguard and use a float. If you don't have a float because it's an emergency situation, toss out your shirt or something, try to pull them back, toss out a big branch, like a big a tree might float. Trees float. So if you can find like a big branch or something and toss it out to them or something like that. Or like, you gotta get them something that floats, like something for them to like hold on to and like use. Like even if you just toss out like a big tree branch, they can probably tread water a bit more effectively if they're holding on to something like that and their natural instincts. And then yell out to them, float on your back, something like that. But we just got to do an aside there, because this sort of thing, believing that it's it's a quote from Darwin. So it doesn't have to do with Paul Ekman. It's just a quote from Darwin. But I want to make that very clear. In this case, man is impelled by the same instinctive motive which made the heroic little American monkey, formerly described, save his keeper by attacking the great and dreadful baboon. Darwin's line of thinking has been borne out by the K.R. Munro's 1996 study of exceptional individuals who rescue strangers at risk of their own life, the heart of altruism, perceptions of a common humanity. And remember, you can rescue strangers without risking your own life. That is why lifeguard deaths are, I think, very rare. How rare are deaths of a trained and licensed lifeguard? Yeah.
Deaths of trained and licensed lifeguards while on duty are extremely rare, largely due to their high level of training, physical fitness, and the presence of safety protocols designed to minimize risk. Lifeguards are specifically trained to recognize potential hazards.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can be smart about it. Honestly, I feel like most people would do that. I don't think there's a lot of people that would just plunge themselves in the water and put their own lives at risk. Darwin did not consider why compassion towards strangers, even at the risk of one's life, is present in only some people. I mean, that's a big claim. I'm not sure if it is present in only some people. Is there a genetic predisposition for such concerns, or does it result solely from upbringing or from some mix of nature and nurture? And this is where I think Paul Ekman is kind of not the best figure to read from. This is a huge claim that it's only present in some people. I feel like every person has similar instincts. It's just the situation. Do they have enough time to rescue the person? Who is that person? And I feel like, the person who's like, completely, you would say, oh, this is the most compassionate person in my life. Look at they just immediately go up and help this drowning person. That's probably a lifeguard. That's probably somebody who's trained and knows what to do in this situation. So there's no hesitation to go out and help because they know exactly what they need to do. So just this idea that there's some inherent quality in someone that makes them more likely to take helpful actions or not, I think is very false. I think it comes down to the training of the person, like what situations are they familiar and comfortable with. So like a lifeguard is more likely to try to help a drowning person than someone not. And then so I really think it has nothing to do with some inherent presence in a person. So is there a genetic predisposition for such concerns, or does it result solely from upbringing or some mix of nature and nurture? Nor did Darwin write about whether it is possible to cultivate such stranger compassion in those who do not have it. Today, these questions are the focus of theory. See G. Gilbert, ed. Compassion, Routledge, 2005, and Empirical Investigation, D. Mobbs et al., A Key Role for Similarity in Vicarious Reward, Science, 2009. In Compassion, an Evolutionary Analysis and Empirical Review in Psychological Bulletin, Goetz, Keltner, and Simon Thomas analyzed the physiological literature on empathy, altruism, and compassion, integrating new evidence that they believe suggests compassion should be considered an emotion. What is it now? Is it not an emotion? Is compassion an emotion?
Yes, compassion is considered an emotion or emotional response. It involves a feeling.
Was it at some point controversial whether or not it was an emotion?
Yes, there has been some debate historically about whether compassion is truly an emotion or something more complex. This controversy arises from how we define emotions and how compassion blends different psychological and philosophical elements. Philosophical perspectives. In ancient philosophy, thinkers like Aristotle and the Stoics often discuss compassion in ethical or moral terms rather than purely emotional ones. Aristotle, for example, viewed it as a virtue that involves rational judgment in response to another person's suffering, while the Stoics generally saw compassion as a weakness because it might interfere with rational action. Psychological perspectives. In modern psychology, compassion is often considered an emotion but is also sometimes seen as a motivational state or a combination of emotions like empathy and kindness. It doesn't fit neatly into the same category as more basic emotions like fear or anger, which are often immediate and reactive. Compassion, by contrast, involves complex processes like perspective taking, empathy, and a desire to act in a supportive way, which has led some psychologists to question whether it should be classified as an emotion or as a broader prosocial behavior. Scientific debate. Some scientists argue that compassion is more than just an emotion because it involves cognition, thinking about the suffering of others, and action, the desire to help. This contrasts with basic emotions that tend to be more instinctive and reactionary. In recent years, however, compassion is more commonly accepted as an emotion, albeit a complex one that includes both emotional and cognitive elements. Do you think that compassion plays an important role in your understanding of relationships at work you do?
So is there generally like classifications of emotions for like weak and strong, or like what are the general classifications of emotions according to the scientific consensus?
Yes, emotions are often classified in various ways according to different dimensions, and the study of emotions has led to several classification systems. Some of the key ways emotions are categorized include basic versus complex emotions, positive versus negative emotions, and dimensional models like valence and arousal. Here are some of the main classifications used in scientific literature. 1. Basic versus complex emotions. Basic emotions. These are universal emotions that are thought to be hardwired into the human brain and are shared across all cultures. They are typically seen as instinctive, automatic responses to stimuli. Psychologist Paul Ekman identified 6 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, surprise. Basic emotions are often associated with distinct facial expressions and are thought to be evolutionarily adaptive. Complex emotions. These are emotions that involve a combination of basic emotions and are more influenced by social and cognitive factors. They often emerge from experiences and relationships requiring more processing and context. Examples include love, guilt, shame, pride, jealousy, compassion. Complex emotions may not have universal facial expressions and are more culturally and situationally dependent. 2. Positive versus negative emotions. Positive emotions. These emotions are generally pleasant and promote well-being. They tend to broaden our awareness and encourage exploration, creativity, and social connection. Examples include joy, gratitude, love, pride, contentment. Negative emotions. These are often unpleasant emotions that are typically triggered by adverse situations and are meant to protect or alert us to potential threats. They narrow our focus and encourage quick action, such as fight or flight. Examples include fear, anger, sadness, disgust, shame. 3. Dimensional models, valence and arousal. Valence. This dimension refers to whether an emotion is positive, pleasant, or negative, unpleasant. For example, positive valence, joy, love. Negative valence, fear, anger. Arousal. This dimension refers to the intensity of the emotion, ranging from low to high. For example, high arousal, excitement, anger, fear, emotions that are intense and energizing. Low arousal, calm, contentment, sadness, emotions that are more subdued and less energizing. This model is sometimes referred to as the circumflex model of emotions, where emotions can be plotted on a graph with valence on one axis and arousal on the other. For example, high arousal plus positive valence, excitement. High arousal plus negative valence, anger. Low arousal plus positive valence, contentment. Low arousal plus negative valence, sadness. 4. Asterisk discrete versus.
All right, create for me like a chart. Create for me like a chart or like a graph or like something, that would really like make this make sense. All right, so we're using MATLAB, Pandas, and NumPy to create scientific graphs, and there we go. So now
I provided both a chart to visually display the different classifications of emotions and their examples, as well as
so we've got basic emotions, complex emotions, positive emotions, negative emotions, high arousal, low arousal, primary emotions, secondary emotions, moral emotions. So yeah, that's pretty helpful. Then we've got emotion classifications and number of examples. So interactive charts are not yet supported, but likely will be soon. So we've got so they have examples of complex and basic. Yeah, so it's still a little bit empty. It's not. It's the AI isn't that good yet, but I mean, look at the potential. Like once the AI is, no longer hallucinating and can actually think, like honestly, I feel like O1 could probably do this pretty well. That like, and already this I mean, just this here is like pretty useful. All right. Anyways. In a forthcoming paper, Compassion and Altruism, Reformulation and Research Agenda, Erica Rosenberg and I consider what we call familiar compassion to be an emotion, albeit with a restricted target, but argue that it is not useful to classify other forms of compassion as emotions. Darwin did offer an example of the origin of compassion. We are, he wrote, impelled to relieve the sufferings of another in order that our own painful feelings may be at the same time relieved. However, as Buddhist scholar B. Alan Wallace points out, Not all people respond to suffering in this way. He notes that a person might, for instance, reflect how fortunate I am that I'm not that other person. Many years ago in my own research, I found that about a third of the people who witnessed a film of a person suffering showed suffering on their own faces, but that an equal number manifested disgust at the sight of suffering. These proportions were the same among Japanese in Tokyo and Americans in California, indicating that the reactions were not affected by culture. Darwin also described how natural selection favored the evolution of compassion, regardless of what originally motivated such behavior. In however complex a manner this feeling may have originated, as it is one of the high importance to all those animals which aid and defend one another, it will have been increased through natural selection for those communities which included the greatest number of sympathetic members, would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. However, contrary to Darwin's expectation, there are no countries today or known in the past in which compassion and altruism towards strangers are showed by the majority of the population. And later in this chapter, Darwin wrote more realistically about the extent of compassion. Let me get a evaluation of that claim, because I feel like there's a lot of big claims being made without anything citing or whatever. So let's evaluate this claim. There we go, and see what.
The claim that there are no countries today or in the past in which compassion and altruism towards strangers are shown by the majority of the population reflects a particular interpretation of human nature and social behavior, but it may oversimplify the complexity of compassion and altruism in societies. Here's an evaluation. Cultural and social context. Many societies have different norms and expectations around altruism and compassion. In some cultures, helping strangers is deeply embedded in social and religious traditions, e.g., zakat in Islamic culture or hospitality traditions in many indigenous cultures. The expectation of altruism might not be uniformly present across all societies, but it is often encouraged within specific contexts, such as helping the vulnerable or during disasters. Measurement of compassion and altruism. Compassion and altruism are difficult to quantify. Acts of altruism may be motivated by various factors, including moral beliefs, religious obligations, or social norms. Additionally, there are many examples of organized altruism, such as charity organizations, humanitarian aid, and volunteer work, that indicate a significant portion of populations in different countries are committed to helping strangers, though this may not represent a majority. Empirical evidence. Studies on prosocial behavior show that people in many parts of the world do engage in compassionate acts towards strangers, particularly in contexts where social cohesion and trust are high. However, individualism, competition, or resource scarcity might reduce the overall rate of altruism in other contexts. For instance, some societies may display less altruism towards strangers due to historical, economic, or political factors. Evolutionary perspective. From an evolutionary standpoint, Darwin might have expected altruism to evolve as a beneficial trait, but this is often more pronounced within close-knit groups, kin selection, reciprocal altruism, rather than towards strangers. While altruism toward non-kin is absurd, it tends to be more situational and context-dependent rather than a default behavior for the majority of people in a society. Global trends in altruism. There are global movements and initiatives such as refugee aid, environmental activism, and health-focused charities, where millions of people contribute toward the well-being of strangers. While this does not necessarily mean a majority of people in any given country are always acting altruistically, it shows that a significant minority is engaged in said behavior, often influencing broader social norms. Conclusion. While the claim that no society has a majority of people consistently showing compassion and altruism towards strangers might be true in the strictest sense, it fails to account for the widespread and structured forms of altruism that exist across societies. Compassionate behavior is often influenced by cultural, social, and situational factors, making it difficult to generalize across all times and places.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird thing to read. So later in this chapter, Darwin wrote more realistically about the extent of compassion. And I need a quick break. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. So I've got about a half an hour here. So Darwin concluded the discussion of the origin and nature of compassion and altruism by describing what he considered the highest moral virtue. He wrote, as man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being once reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to the men of all nations and races. If they appear different, experience unfortunately skews us how long it is. Oh, this is a quote. Yeah. So So it's yeah, exactly. This I think this means that this is exactly what they said, even if it might seem like they misspoke. So if they appear different, experience, unfortunately, shoes. Yeah. So this word SHEWS is kind of a weird word, and I mispronounced it as SKUs, but we can see that this is from an old text, so it means show. So what it means is experience unfortunately shows us how long it is before we look at them as our fellow creatures. So this SIC really mattered a lot because it shows that this is not the word skew. It's not a misspelling. It's exactly what the person said. Which makes sense because it's an old-fashioned version of spelling show, and this is an older text. Sympathy beyond the confines of man, that is humanity to the lower animals, seems to be one of the latest moral acquisitions. This virtue, concern for lower animals, one of the noblest with which man is endowed, seems to arise incidentally from our sympathies becoming more tender and more widely diffused, until they extend to all sentient beings. So this is a quote by Darwin. All right, moving on. During discussions I held with the Dalai Lama about emotions and compassion, on which our book Emotional Awareness was based, I read this last Darwin quote to him. The Dalai Lama's translator, Thupten Jinpa, exclaimed, "Did he use that phrase, all sentient beings?" Jinpa was surprised because this phrase is the exact English translation of the Buddhist description of all-encompassing compassion of a Buddhist Attva. Charles Darwin was rare among thinkers of his time in taking this view, and only in the later part of the 12th century did such a concern for compassion toward non-human beings become more popular. Darwin was far ahead of his time. This remarkable similarity between the Buddhist view of virtue and Darwin's raises the tantalizing possibility that Darwin might have derived his views from Buddhist writings. Darwin did know at least something about Buddhism by the time he wrote The Descent of Man. J.D. Hooker, Darwin's closest friend, spent many years in the Himalayas. Leading Darwin scholar Janet Brown told me, Darwin might easily have discussed such matters with J.D. Hooker after Hooker's travels in Sikkim and elsewhere in India. And Alison Pirney, co-editor of Evolution, The Selected Letters of Charles Darwin, notes that Hooker mentioned Buddhism in his letters to Darwin from India. Nonetheless, the nub of Darwin's ideas on morality and compassion appear in his 1838 notebooks, 2 years after his return from the voyage of the Beagle, when Darwin was 29. This was 5 years before he met Hooker. Randall Keyes, Darwin's great-great-grandson, described Darwin's thinking about these issues in the notebooks as follows. His comments were carelessly worded, but he was in no doubt about his underlying claim. Darwin wrote, "Might not our sense of right and wrong stem from reflection with our growing mental powers on our actions, as they were bound up with our instinctive feeling of love and concern for others? If any animal with social instincts developed the power of reflection, it must have a conscience." Darwin noted in his notebook, "Without regarding the origin, the individual forgets itself and aids and defends and acts for others at its own expense." Darwin was also interested at this early point in his life in the origins of morality. What has produced the greatest good, or rather what is necessary for good at all, is the instinctive moral senses. In judging of the rule of happiness, we must look far forward and to the general action, certainly because it is the result of what has generally been best for our good far back. Society could not go on except for the moral sense. Darwin noted his debt to David Hume. In 1838, Darwin read Hume's Inquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals and thought it important for developing a theory divorced from divine instruction. As Randall Keynes remarks in Darwin, His Daughter, and Human Evolution, David Hume had put sympathy at the center of his thinking about the natural sources of moral principles. He saw it as a natural feeling rather than an attitude based on reasoning from some abstract notion. There is some benevolence, however small, infused into our bosom, some spark of friendship for mankind, some particle of the dove needed in our frame, along with the element of the wolf and the serpent. Charles now developed this idea and speculated how our moral sense might also grow naturally from that feeling. Darwin wrote, looking at man as a naturalist would look at any other mammiferous animal, it may be concluded that he has parental, conjugal, and social instincts. These instincts consist of a feeling of love or benevolence to the object in question, such active sympathy that the individual forgets itself and aids and defends and acts for others at his own expense. In concluding the introduction to their edition of Descent of Man, James Moore and Adrian Desmond wrote that some of Darwin's contemporaries who studied this book emphasized the humane aspects of Darwin's Victorian values, duty, selflessness, and compassion. Francis Cobbe, a feminist theorist and pioneer animal rights activist, accused readers who would picture the author as a man who has unconsciously attributed his own abnormally generous and placable nature to the rest of his species, and then theorized as if the world were made of Darwin's. Yeah, this would be kind of a interesting article to read on Wikipedia because it looks like this activist was started the movement against vivisection. So like the stuff they used to do in the name of science to animals was absurd. So you might not have the stomach for it, but it's some of it might be mentioned here, like for example, the Pavlovian response is not a result of somebody's cute puppy, wagging its tail happily for a bell. It's a result of cutting dogs up in really bizarre ways. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting one to that. So this is a anti-vivisection activist. So if you wanna get the heavy metal on in the background, dive into vivisection, which is a surgery conducted for experimental purposes on a living organism. Yeah, so get your heavy metal music out, and if you want to dive into that. Okay, so Darwin's thinking about compassion, altruism, and morality certainly reveals a different picture of this great thinker's concerns than the one portrayed by those who focus on the catchphrase, the survival of the fittest. In fact, a quote from Spencer, not Darwin. Those unacquainted with his writings, and even some scientists, are unaware of Darwin's commitment to the unity of mankind, his abolitionist convictions, and his intense interest in moral principles and human and animal welfare. All right, so let's read more about Paul Ekman. He's a renowned expert in emotional skills and nonverbal communication, pioneering techniques to unmask deception and other mental states through facial recognition. Facial recognition. Okay, so he collaborated with the Dalai Lama in the 2008 book Emotional Awareness, and 2009 Time magazine named him one of its top 100 influential people. So big figure, lots of good dense information in there. I like that. So so now we've only got two readings to go, and then we do have the formal and informal to go. Reading that took about an hour. It took 45 minutes. So hopefully these other two are shorter. But that's all the time I have. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.